First of all, I should say thank you and congratulations to Yarra Rangers. My experience, which is very minimal, has been that when the local authority brings everybody together and creates these sorts of events, it seems to me it's much more helpful because it's at the place with the people who've been affected. They've got much more familiarity with you all and all of the issues that you're going with. So I think, congratulations to Yarra Rangers for organising. I think that's a really good thing. Also, I'm humbled and privileged to be here. So I know it's tough, and I don't know why that happened, sorry. Just to give you some background, so I've got past experience in providing pro bono services, usually with bushfire affected areas. So in 2009, the Institute called me because somebody had called them and said, could I go and help her? And then I was also in the CFA, and so there were contacts made through the CFA, and I spent a lot of time talking to people about the process of rebuilding, or I shouldn't say rebuilding, but the process of building and what they would need to do. It varied a lot. We didn't do a lot of building out of that. For a lot of people, it was really just helping them know what the next steps were, what was the process they may need to go through, and the things to think about. So I spent a bit of time in Flowerdale and Whittlesea as a result through most of 2009. I'm now a member of Architects Assist, which is something that was established, and then the Institute of Architects now sort of holds that as a platform. There's a series of architects who have put their hands up to provide pro bono services. It might be for part of the service, it might be for the whole service, it depends on the architect at the time. It was established in 2020, but the idea is that it will continue because obviously there's architects nationally, and so they'll also be helping in flood affected areas. They've been helping in Victoria and New South Wales. I think that's enough about me. What I thought I'd like to do is probably talk with you rather than at you, hopefully. As architects, I was just mentioning, we're very good at problem solving, and really our job is to listen. So if it's okay, I'll talk you through some examples which hopefully just talk about how we've approached different sites that might be similar to yours, but also the process and what are the opportunities that you may have now for a new build. So looking at it with fresh eyes. One of the things that was really helpful for me listening to Rob, and I was saying to him, a lot of this was coming back to me and rang true. But one of the things, we find architecture a joy. We enjoy it because it's a creative process, and we always want our clients to enjoy the process as well. So we do tend to help you through all of the process and not necessarily ask you to do the work. As if you're a client, we go out and do things, and the first step we ask is that we ask you to write a brief. And we find the brief a really useful thing to sit down and write in words, but also provide pictures and sort of, I suppose, dream and imagine what could be. But also in the brief, what's really important to us is not just, I want 3 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, the kitchen's got to have a galley kitchen, this, and it's got to have that. And it's also about what we call conceptually. So what are the brilliant parts of the site that you really love? What are the trees that you want to look at that you've still got? How do you respond to the landscape? What is special about that place for you? What are things you like that you may have seen in architecture or other dwellings and other homes? And I think this is the thing that I probably need to emphasise is we're inclined to talk about a house. This is your home. So how are we making it your new home and your place? And it's really about how you want it to feel. So we often ask our clients to do that. And sometimes for us it's kind of interesting too, because if it's a couple, it forces them to actually look at an issue that maybe they don't agree about, and they just didn't realise that they didn't agree about it. So it might be, but I really wanted this. I don't think that's relevant. And so it means they've gone and almost had that conversation without us. Sometimes we also wrangle the different opinions, and that's absolutely fine too. But the thing that we will do is do the research, and I understand a number of you have started with that process, and I believe Yarra Rangers has been really helpful. So we do start looking at, before we even believe me, our imaginations are running wild, but before we start the process, we do get land capability assessments, usually in conjunction with the geotechnical assessment. So particularly with sites that are actually going to need septic or wastewater treatment, etc. We'll get BAL reports done early. We'll even get a site and feature survey so that we know where are the boundaries, what's the fall on the site, where are the flat sections, where are the rises, the falls, where are the trees, etc. And we'll do a lot of research into the planning. Is there an erosion management issue? Is there design development overlays? You know, what is that? So there's quite a bit of component that we really just stop and think about in the beginning. And so I guess for you, as Rob said, there's that moment to actually stop, breathe, and think about the brief and think about how you might want to be in the future. So I'll talk you through some, because we can't help but do this as architects because we love pictures. They're not necessarily, in terms of bushfire, they're not necessarily BAL 40s, they're not necessarily BAL flame zones, but it's more about design approach in those particular locations. Do I hit a button or something?
Just go to this one second.
Okay. But look, I'll keep talking. So the first one you're going to see is Dean's Marsh, which is on Gadibunalta country. We actually started the design of this before 2009, so it's a slightly different response to what we'd be required to do today. But in terms of our research, one of the things the client said to me is he was really looking forward to having a big stabilised ground dirt pool like Yarra at the Tarawara Gallery. And then he walked through that and he came down. And then I saw the site and went, oh, I think we'll get a geotech done really early. And we found that, what we found was that it was a 22-degree slope site, a lot of clear land in front, so we had an idea of where the house might go. And there was a sort of flat section to allow us to drive in. But once we got the geotech done, we realised we were dealing with slippage. Oh. Thank you, Rob. So so when you've got land slippage, putting retaining walls in and solid walls that are sort of along the line of the site, the contour, obviously what starts to happen is it's getting hydrostatic pressure and it's really not going to work in that scenario. So, there we go. I'll just put it onto the screen. Thank you.
The projector puts itself to sleep.
Oh,
It's
sleep
not
again?
on you.
That's okay, it just takes a second to
Okay.
okay. All good. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks. Here we go, back. Okay. So this is the house as it's built. So you can probably see it's quite steep. So as a result of the geotech tests, we just said, okay, well, it's not a stabilised ground dirt wall, it's not a wall at all. And we said it's now going on stilts, or it's going on a sort of footing structure. And the footing structure is actually tying the ground together. So the engineers came in early and said, this is what we're going to do, we're going to tie the ground in. The next step was I was going, oh, let's do prefab. Let's have a think about this. So then I was talking to a builder who works down there and I said, could you have a look, let's talk to structure about that at the same time. And he drove the site and said, I can't put a crane on that site and lift something that heavy into the site. So we got him in very early to say that's not going to be a possibility. So I guess it's just sort of showing that idea of researching what we needed to think about before we even put pen to paper, that we still had an idea of how the organisation of the house would work, and the idea of materials. He was really keen on the idea of a sense of rural shed. Today I probably wouldn't do as complex a roof as this has, but it's got amazing south views when we were trying to get the northerly sun in. But it's all clad in fibre cement sheet and corrugated iron. The windows are all aluminium. The structure below the ground, above the ground, below the house is all clad and protected. The only thing that's sort of sacrificial is the deck. So we just said, well, we'll make the house structurally sound, but if fire lands on the deck, which has a special product that's resilient to fire, but we said we'll just let it be that if that burns, it's not at least affecting the house. And that's a principle we've used quite a lot, is just let the deck go. Yeah, so you can probably see the steepness of that site, etc. in there. We've got rainwater tanks underneath, so in some respects that elevation was advantageous in getting the tanks underneath. There was still a bit of excavation, etc. to be done, but we were trying to sort of avoid that as much as possible because of the erosion issues. We had design development overlays. We had a fight with the local council about using zinc alone. We won. Small wins. So we were kind of happy with that because it's in a very remote location. But you can see having just driven in again, there was quite a clear site for us to actually build in, but there was still a discussion about managing the land either side. So there was some new growth either side of the house that we also had to be mindful of managing. And there's a track for the CFA tank that they can actually come in and go out. So they come in one end and right the other. So we had to pin right back to that site. Oh, have I gone backwards? No, but that's the plan. So it's all about the view. So everybody's got a view except the laundry and the pantry. Yeah, I don't think I need to talk about that much more. Why do I feel like I'm going backwards?
Yeah, just keep using that. And
Sorry.
right. There we go.
Sorry, I should have explained where that was before, but sorry, I will. So that was the site when we visited it. So you can see, I don't know if you can see the photo sometimes how steep something is. And that's the top one's looking back up the side, this bottom one is where we more or less built looking down. And that's its location just at the back of the Otways there. So I think we worked out it's this one. Right. In the meantime, I had, I don't know how many years ago, come up with a concept about a little flexible cabin that could be built anywhere. So it's a 2-bedroom unit essentially with a dining, living, kitchen, laundry space, bathroom. It's pretty simple. It was always the idea that it was a steel frame and that it had 3 sides to it that could be adapted to orientation in terms of getting views and northerly sunlight, etc. In 2009, the Office of the Victorian Government Architect called out to architects to say, has anybody got anything sitting in their bottom drawer? So we put this one up as an option potentially for people to rebuild, and it can be extended and adapted to more bedrooms, etc. We spoke to a few people in Churchill who were really keen, and then they decided to leave Churchill after 2009, and that was fine. So the principle of it is, as I said, very simple, sort of 2 bedrooms. We're now doing it up in, believe it or not, East Trinity Beach, just outside of Cairns. So if you're standing in Cairns looking at the foreshore, you see East Trinity over there, not Trinity up there, but over there. And I was a bit gobsmacked, but they had flame zone. And I was like, oh wow. And the principle for us in this one was the idea of the verandas that wrap around. They are fly screen meshed at the moment because obviously it's Queensland, and these people really liked this because it was that old Queensland style of just air through the building. So it was all about passive ventilation, passive heat loads, etc. But also the veranda has a fly screen mesh, so that the veranda again sort of becomes a sacrificial area. But the living space that you can see, or the dining space here in this model, the dining space here, this is also the living space, and this is where we put the roller shutters here. So in terms of taking it up to a higher grade, basically the house is fairly open. Okay, it's North Queensland, so it's a bit different. But we use the fire shutters there to shut down the rest of the house to make it comply with fire. But again, it's adapted to the fact that we've got a different site. If I go back to that photo, it was this idea of adapting it to suit the falls of the site. It lands very lightly on the site, so again, we're not sort of pulling at the soil and excavating a lot, except they asked for an option to have a study space downstairs. But they had a flat section in which we could do that. There's a lot of boulders, a lot of rainforest, a lot of forest. I was quite surprised how bushy it was compared to rainforest, which is usually the expectation that you have at East Trinity. Sorry, I forgot to stop at Dean's Marsh. Did anyone have any questions about that? No? Yeah. And any questions about this one?
Would the roof catch a lot of leaf litter?
It does, yeah. This one, they were really keen on that model. I've subsequently thought perhaps we should just have one where the roof just goes in a single pitch. But we've got a really wide gutter in that situation because of the extent of rainfall they get as well. and we're putting a mesh protection over it, but we've made it a sort of wide platform so we can catch a lot of water that actually runs through there as well. But yeah, I subsequently thought perhaps this isn't the right roof form, but they were really keen on that sort of mid-century modern.
I think that's not good.
Sorry.
I was just curious about the building in of the downstairs that you mentioned as a study.
Yeah.
How would that work with that design?
Most of the models I designed originally was you actually came up a flight of stairs up to the house externally. This one, there's a flight of stairs inside that box. The box is lined with cement sheet and fire-rated windows. And they, to be honest with you, they needed it for the bank loan. They needed to show the bank that they had 3 bedrooms.
All right.
It's like going back to the 1940s. It was ridiculous, you know. But they said, oh, we have to show we've got another bedroom. So they're actually not going to build that. They're just going to fire rate the stairwell up. Yeah. But yeah, they thought, well, they could make it a work from home study sort of space as well. And again, it's a simple steel structure as well. So it's not, there's no timber in it. We're using what they call fire crunch. Again, it's a different circumstance because they don't need to insulate walls the same way we do. They've got no intention of air conditioning this. So they're using a fire crunch system on the floors and on the walls as well. And that's sort of it in elevation. So this is showing that idea of the sort of fly screen mesh. That's obviously this one's a heavy duty cyclone proof. That's the other thing we had to deal with cyclone force. So it's kind of, let's get the steel structure in dealing with that first. This was a house we did later, and I guess the reason I brought this house up was, again, we had to position this because of trees, etc. There was a covenant on the site as well, which was about protecting trees, but we worked with the client very closely about looking at the trees they loved and also avoiding some areas that we needed to. But it's very much the idea of a contained building that opens up. And I think that's it's one of the principles that we've been using a lot in these sort of circumstances, and what I call designing in rather than designing out. So when we're thinking about a new house, you know, it's better if we actually, as I said, all of that research work is done early and we know what we're designing to and how we design those issues in, rather than we design something and now we've got to layer all of these things to think about it, to get it to work properly. So, and then it becomes much more cost effective. So this house again is partially on stilts, but it was also very much about making a small footprint. They were really keen on their landscape. They didn't want to have a huge footprint. So we've done some multi-uses of some spaces because it is a holiday house at the end of the day, and do you really need a bedroom for every guest? Or could we just find sort of nooks and crannies for people? So when I say about shutting it down, so this whole facade shuts down, so there's a screened door through there, and there's again that fly mesh behind, and so that's reduced the need for us to put fire-rated windows in behind all of these screens here. So it becomes a very tight box when it's finished. And then here we've built in sections so that we could put in fire shutters if they want to put them in at a later date. So we've integrated these sort of frames so that when the fire shutters come in, they don't just look like something plonked on, but they're actually able to integrate them in properly. And this is sort of standing, so this is how we dealt with some of the decks and the idea that that opens up later, but it's the protection mechanism in the meantime. And this was the small footprint I'm talking about, so it's a little bit confusing. So you come in at this entry level and sort of transcend down because there is a slope on the site. And so there's a few bedrooms there and their workspace, but then down here under this section, which is under this bedroom, there's another day bed, but also it's a whole nook in which you could sleep 4 people, okay, albeit their heads just sticking out the end. So we were building in sections like that and making it a fairly tight footprint. And again, that idea that the veranda was sacrificial and the shutters sort of go along here. So it becomes quite a tight box. It's in its shape because it's on the southwest coast, so we were trying to protect that space, that external space from the southwesterlies. So again, it was just trying to make a really small, efficient footprint with some thermal. And there's and along this wall, we integrated people block internally to make it fire resistant, and that's also become our thermal mass in that situation. Any questions? And look, this is the last one I'll talk about. This is a house we're doing as a result of the 2020 fires. And this was very interesting. These people, this was their existing site here, and it's literally on a ridge. And then the state forest is right behind them, coming down towards them. So it's quite a steep site. It has bush up here. Well, it had, but anyway, it's bush. It was already benched, so it's not necessarily the approach that we would normally do today, but there was a flat bench site already. And I guess that's the thing that concerned me though, was the extent that the site had been benched. What were we going to do about erosion control? What were we going to do about water running off altogether? Do we need to stabilise that soil? He was sort of, he's a bit gung-ho, lovely man, but it was just like, okay, just hold off for a bit. He had the idea of the plan already, and in the meantime we were looking at the site. Now in this circumstance there was the Bushfire Recovery Victoria appointed an expert panel, because not only was this a flame zone, but it was a high risk flame zone. So it took quite a while to convince him, but eventually when the expert panel came on, everybody finally convinced him that perhaps that wasn't the right site to be on. Now he had the advantage of quite a large site. So what we've subsequently done, and he can see the merit of it, is we've now brought him down to another bench site where he used to have sheds. And so the risk for him is far less. The extent of excavation that's happened there is far less. It's having less impact on the ground and the trees and the erosion. And it's also made for a much more direct access in for the CFA, albeit we've got to put a passing lane. But it's changed how difficult it will be for him to build, and all of the other costs that will be associated. So there's been benefits in that. It's been a road that he obviously had to be comfortable with. But I suppose what I should explain is not only is it this, but then it becomes flat, rural farmed land. So it was far less risk associated with it. And then just briefly, oh no, sorry. So this is the plan, and again, this is a much tighter plan, and it's triple skin brickwork, much at his request. So we've really wrapped it around with the triple skin, and then again, the veranda actually is going to have drop-down shutters in this situation. So instead of layering it onto the windows, we're putting the shutters out the front, and then again, that means his windows don't have to be fire rated as well. That's an either-or. You know, you could actually you could put the windows closer, but it means that we don't have to protect the soffit levels under here. There's a whole lot of benefits for us in terms of what we're going to have to rate. And the other thing about this, which the other architect will talk about too, was the idea of a single pitched roof. So you can see these walls of brick around these three sides. Where it's opening, there'll be drop-down verandas. It's a single pitch roof, so it's good. It's going down with the slope, so we're hoping it'll sort of nestle into the landscape a bit and not be as sort of a big thing screaming out. But also it means it's far less flashings, single point down to feed the rainwater tanks, and it's all fairly straightforward. And that's about to go into planning. So that's 2020. So I think that's a point about that Rob raised is it does take time. But I think if you can stop and breathe and enjoy the process, because it can be an enjoyable process. As I said, it's a creative process for both the architect or the designer and you, and it can be a very positive process. But it does require time, even for clients who haven't necessarily been through what you've been, they still have to take the steps through. So I think if you can take some time to enjoy the process, and remember it's about building yourselves a home. As Rob said, it's about where do you see your future, where do you see yourself on this place. I think the other thing is I've left something about working with an architect. We do have architects assist at the Institute of Australian Institute of Architects. So, you know, we can send Marcella the link, although you may have it already. Do you have a link? It's a notice to the link. We'll we'll put the link on there for you as well. So there may be architects out there who are also happy to help as well. And I think, one of the things to consider is that the architect will help you with the whole process. They won't just sort of do the drawings. We actually do manage the process as much as possible for you, as much as you want, as little as you want.